Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, broadcaster, writer, and from time to time, medical reporter. I've done some coverage of medical issues, but never of yoga or the use of yoga in medicine. So I am delighted to have my friend Janne Roehm with me today, who uses yoga to treat age, various people who are old, who need the guidance they get, the help they get from yoga, but most especially osteoporosis, which is a dread thing for women as they age, a loss of bone density for women. Janne, I'm so glad you're doing this. Tell me about your own experience with osteoporosis. It ran in your family, you were a patient, and yoga solved it for you. Mm-hmm. Tell us that story.
So my mother had very severe osteoporosis. She had lost 7 inches in total, and very much the dowager's hump, which created its own health problems, including heart issues. And then I was diagnosed in my late 50s with osteoporosis, and I had had 2 DEXA scans 2 years apart, and it was getting worse.
A DEXA scan is a bone density scan.
It's the standard bone density test that they use these days. And so the progression is they're actually testing you against 20 to 30-year-old bone density, and then there is a certain density that's considered osteopenia, which is sort of a red flag. And then there's osteoporosis, where it can start to get dangerous. It can be very dangerous if you fall down and break a bone. It can also lead to that gradual curving forward of the spine, which is in its own way a problem. I then learned about Dr. Lauren Fishman, who was a Manhattan physiatrist who had conducted a peer-reviewed medical study to check the efficacy of certain yoga poses to increase bone density, which was in a way radical, because that's not, people usually think about yoga as nice for flexibility. They don't particularly think about it for strength of bones. But he had had enough experience with both yoga and his rehab patients to be pretty sure that this was going to work. And it resulted in a study, a peer-reviewed medical study that was statistically significant and published in a medical journal and written up in the New York Times and many other places.
Janne, let's suppose that I am Mrs. Doe, and I come to you and I fear that I'm getting osteoporosis. I'm older, I'm leaning forward a little bit. What happens then? How do you start the treatment? How do you examine her to begin with, and what happens?
So I don't examine and I don't diagnose, but I can say that this practice, which is 12 poses, can be very effective for osteoporosis, whether or not you even know you have it. It's also very good for arthritis and good for flexibility in general, so that as a general practice, to add a 15-20 minute yoga practice to your toolbox, it's a very generally recommended practice to begin with.
Give us some idea of one of these poses. What sort of pose? People get a little frightened, I find, at the idea of yoga, that they're lying on the floor, that they're stretching, that they have to have a special mat and maybe special pants. How does it really work?
You don't need special pants. You can do this on your rug. You can use a yoga mat. One of the things about this practice and about Dr. Fishman's approach is to find the right version of the pose that works for you. So if you are unable to stand, you can do it in a chair. If you can stand, but the idea of actually reaching your hand all the way down to the floor in a pose would be too much for your spine, then we can use blocks, or we often use chairs, so that you can find the version of the pose that lets your spine be long and very much in its natural curves. And then the poses are pretty classic yoga poses. There are poses like the triangle, the side angle. They build strength, they build balance, they build flexibility, and because the breathing is always involved, they tend to really help increase your breathing capacity and also to reduce anxiety often.
My imaginary Mrs. Doe, who is taking courses from you, how long before she would see some improvement in her condition and begin to feel better about herself and about her condition?
So this is a long-term practice. You're not going to see like an instant improvement, but what you will see is improvement, because typically osteoporosis increases over time.
It's progressive.
It's progressive, and it's a very natural, normal process, but some of us do it way more rapidly than others, and that's when it gets dangerous. And so to be able to reverse that, and to be able to reverse that with a practice that can enhance your quality of life, that's quite a dramatic thing right there.
So what you're doing is really quite noble, but there's another dimension to it, and that is you do volunteer work in hospitals in what you have told me is chair yoga, which immediately suggests that I'm sitting down and just moving part of myself. What is chair yoga?
So chair yoga, I actually volunteer at a residential center, a nursing center where my parents were. And I started teaching it because my mother could benefit from it. So I went with a good friend and we developed a half-hour chair yoga practice. What's interesting with that is that as long as you can sit in a chair, you can do it. I have students who are in wheelchairs.
Give us an age bracket for these students.
Actually, it could be anybody. Typically in that facility, it would be somebody 70 or older. I had a student who was 100 years old. But she could come in her walker and she'd sit in the chair and then she'd participate. So you can, even if you're seated, you can use your arms. You can raise your arms up as high as they comfortably go. You can definitely often lift your legs and move them around. We can work with the spine and all the different ways that the spine can go. We work with breathing because that helps so much as you get older. And when you work with the breath, it's not just that you can breathe more easily. It reduces anxiety, and it can help with the rhythm of your heart as well, because the lungs and the heart are so intimately connected.
Can you give me an anecdote? Tell me about one patient. Is that what you call them, patients or subject?
No, they're my students.
One student who, over a period of time, you saw improve in all the ways that this can work, confidence and comfort and well-being in health. Can you think of a student who tells the story?
I have students who tell me something as simple as, oh, I can finally reach everything in the cabinets again. But more, I had students who were in dialysis and they told me they would go into the breathing when they were at dialysis, and that just made the whole process so much better for them. The patients will tell me, not patients, I'm sorry, I'm doing the same thing, students will tell me that when they go to their physical exam, you know, they breathe and they find their calmness, and you know, the whole thing just goes better. But it is the flexibility, it is the strength, it is the balance, it is the sense of where their body parts are, and it is the sense of being in a group that's together. There's a community piece to it too.
Tell me, Janne, how do new students find you? Are you on the web?
I teach at InnerLight. I do have a web address. It's called Shri One Life. Now, in Sanskrit, Shri means all things life enhancing. And that has my schedule. I teach at InnerLight in Middletown.
That's Middletown, Rhode Island.
That is Middletown, Rhode Island, yes. And I'm also available through the emails on the website. I have an email, yoga, the numeric 4, bones, @gmail.com. And you can email me at any time.
You showed me, before we went on the air, photographs that you take of your students, so that they can be, and some of them seem to be, you know, not enormously athletic, but they're getting it done, as it were. This helps, does it, to have a photographic record of progress and of showing people what they got wrong?
I'm not so interested in what they got wrong, but helping them to really feel very grounded, long in the spine, aligned, and really alive with the breath. And so if I have the advantage of private sessions with someone, we'll work through that yoga for osteoporosis practice. And once we determine the most comfortable place for them, whether it's with hands on a block or on a chair, take a photo, and then I have a document that I can send to them with pictures and tips for each of the poses. So I had one student, when I did that, she took each page, because there was one pose per page, and just put them up where she was going to practice it, and she could just see how it looks. Because you know, when people explain things and you're busy trying to get in a pose, you don't remember what it looks like. But when you see yourself, you go, oh yeah, the hand was here, the leg was there, and then she said to breathe. So.
And the one bit we haven't mentioned, meditation.
Ah, yes.
Where does meditation fit in with the practice of yoga? And do you encourage meditation as part of the progress of your students?
I do encourage meditation. It can be done after a yoga session. If you cultivate a practice where you do it often, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, very straightforward practice. So we often begin with using the breath as your focus. And that's a simple practice, but it's not necessarily easy, because you'll discover if you're watching your breath and you're sitting, your mind will very quickly move to other things. And then you remember and you pull your mind back and you pay attention to your breath. But there's a lot of documented evidence that meditation is very helpful for a multitude of physical things as you get older.
You can't be all over the country, but there are networks. There are other people who can help students or potential students. Do you hand out names? Do you have a reference system? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've told me you're prepared to travel within reason, but you can't one day have a student in Seattle and the next day in Chicago and back in Rhode Island. So clearly there must be other practitioners.
There are. There are actually two answers to that. Several of my teachers use Skype or other sort of visual things to teach students long distance. So there is that possibility, but there is also, on Dr. Fishman's website, there is a whole list of certified teachers in yoga for osteoporosis. It's actually an odd name. It's called sciatica.org. But also, if you Google Lauren Fishman, it will come right up too.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I thank you so much, and what a fascinating undertaking. And very gratifying that you see people getting better, isn't it?
It is, including me.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much for coming on this broadcast today.
Thank you so much, Llewellyn.